I will. Welcome everyone to the Printmaker's Hand 5 juried exhibit, Jurors Talk and Awards presentation. I'm Michael D'Alessandro. I'm the exhibits director for Northwind Art, and I'm delighted to be here with this group and to be able to host this juror talk. Our juror was with us also, Marit Berg, and I'll introduce her in a little bit. Before we start, though, I'd like to read a land acknowledgement. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we gather today in Port Townsend on ancestral homelands of the S'Klallam, Suquamish, Makah, Chimacum, and Twana Skokomish nations, as well as many other trading tribes. Native peoples have cared for these lands and continue to do so today, and please join me in expressing our deepest respect and gratitude. Now, I will say this Printmaker's Hand 5 exhibit is a longtime partnership with Corvidae Press. And Corvidae is an association of artists who share an interest in fine art printmaking and who support and manage a communal non-toxic printmaking facility right here in Port Townsend, Washington. Corvidae was founded in 2006 as a nonprofit governed by an elected board of directors dedicated to the pursuit of the printmaker's craft with a focus on education, community, and regional interaction. I lost my screen here. I'm reading. One moment. They are located at Fort Worden, right here in Port Townsend, in Building 205, and the print room holds 3 etching presses, the largest being a 30-inch American French tool. I want to show a video of the exhibit. It's a 5-minute video. I'll share my screen now so that we can get that queued up. And afterwards, I'll introduce the juror and she will give her talk. So hold on here. Thank you. And that was a little longer than our usual walkthroughs, but we have a lot to look at in this exhibit. Um, Juror Marit Berg, a printmaker and art professor in Tacoma, Washington, selected approximately 60 works from 40 artists for the gallery exhibition, which includes 9 generous awards, including a People's Choice Award, which will be given out at the end of the exhibit. So you still have time to go to the exhibit if you can and vote for your favorite piece. Marit Berg's artwork is literally the offspring of 2 very different modes of art making. Her father taught printmaking for 30 years, and her mother was a Fulbright scholar, abstract expressionist painter. Throughout her childhood, she traveled the world with them, attending museums and schools along the way. Although she grew up in the printmaking studio, fascinated by the chemistry and machines used to create the work, she primarily thought of herself as a painter until 5 years after receiving her MFA, when she took a position in the printmaking department at Tacoma Community College, where she has taught for the past 14 years. So I'll turn this over to Marit, and she will give her talk.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Michael. I'd just like to say a few thank yous first before I get started. Everybody for coming tonight and hearing this talk. Thank you to Margaret Woodcock of Corvidae Press for inviting me to Juror, this year's Printmaker Hand 5. And thank you, Michael, for welcoming me to the Northwind Art Center Gallery and staying late when I got there on that Friday afternoon to help me take the time to really absorb all the wonderful prints included in the exhibition. I also must acknowledge the really masterful job done in hanging the show, which is always a challenge when so many diverse visions are represented. I guess I don't really need to tell you too much more about myself. Thank you for that intro, Michael. I do come from a household of artists. My parents met in graduate school and really continued their artistic careers throughout their lives. My father, as Michael mentioned, Robert Berg, taught at San Diego State University, actually for 40 years, I think. And I did take classes with him because I got my undergraduate degree from San Diego State in painting and printmaking. Printmaking was kind of in my blood, but at the time, I think as a 20-something, I was really interested more in painting at the time. The technical aspect of printmaking bug hadn't bitten me quite yet. I went to Washington State University for my graduate degree, and they were looking for a printmaker in their graduate program. So I TA'd for the professor there, Rita Robillard, and I then expanded my my background in printmaking media to include lithography and photo etching. So I got to experiment in what was then the brand new facility at Washington State. So they had all sorts of a beautiful print room with litho presses and etching presses, and believe it or not, a ventilated inking table, because they were very concerned about fumes and toxic printmaking at that time. When I graduated, I moved to Tacoma and took a place as artist in residence at Pacific Lutheran University, and then stayed on for a year and taught painting there. And while I was there, I studied some new techniques in plate lithography from Professor Dennis Cox, and really got a good sense of how to run a really tight print room. He was just a real master of being able to keep a clean side of the print room and the dirty side of the print room so that you could get really, really nice prints. But before teaching, a lot of us graduate students, we kind of wander around doing odd jobs until if we're lucky enough to land that teaching job. Maybe some of you out there have had that experience. But I worked for the artist Dale Chihuly for about 2 years before I got my teaching job. And I not as a glass blower or anything exciting like that. I worked as a registrar for his traveling exhibitions. So that meant kind of following the shows. He usually had about 4 or 5 shows out at the time, and kind of packing up the show and sending it on to the next venue. So it was very exciting and opened my eyes to really what goes on behind the scenes of an international artist, and really the teamwork and organization that it takes to make exhibits like that happen. With all the personalities involved, it often felt like a set of a movie at times. So when I took my position at Tacoma Community College, it was kind of a sigh of relief in a way, to be able to kind of take charge again of my own classroom. Because I am an artist and an educator, I try and keep pace with many traditional printmaking techniques and new media. I work in a variety of media, specifically lino-cut printmaking for its immediacy, but it's also its real long history interests me. I also work in digital imaging. I have to kind of keep up with that because a lot of my students are coming from that era. I use it mostly for composing, but more recently I've been using it to transpose images of my drawings onto photosensitized screens in screen printing. And there's a lot of steps involved, so I like to take breaks from that complexity and go back to the simplicity of the lino cut. So I'm kind of all over the place. I work in lithography, I work in etching, but mainly relief and screen print right now. Ultimately, though, I think I really like to spend time in the studio. So even though I do work with computer processing, I hand print all my work in the studio and spend time there. It's very relaxing for me. In fact, I just put my show up at Core, and I've decided to spend the whole month just printing. And I really do enjoy that. As an artist speaking here tonight, I believe maybe the majority of my audience are printmakers or collectors of prints. So you all recognize the advantage this discipline has over many other media, mainly that our work is produced in multiples. And this allows us to have our work in a multitude of galleries and print shows. And I always try and stress this to my students, the advantage printmaking really has over some of the other media like drawing and painting. You don't just get one, you get 50 or whatever your edition may be. So many of you probably have a work in this show at Northwind, but you might also have that same image in another gallery in another city. And it's a great way to spread out as an artist. I myself, I'm represented by Davidson Galleries in Seattle, Brumfield Gallery in Astoria, and then most recently, Karen Clark in Eugene. So if you ever get down there, she's just opened a second gallery and has some really wonderful stuff. My editions are typically pretty small, no more than 50, I would say, but usually more about 25 in a run. But it's a good feeling to know that so much of my work is out there, that it is in editions. And I've actually recently closed a few editions out. So so that's been a little reward for me. Turning the attention to the exhibition here tonight, first let me say how challenging it was to select the participants from their online submissions. It's not much different from looking at slides. I mean, that really hasn't changed that much. but it's important to note that an image on the screen or on the computer lacks the scale, it lacks texture, which is a really important part of printmaking, I think. And I can't tell you how delighted I was when I walked into the Northwind Art Center and saw the show. It was just a delight to my eyes. Huge smile on my face. I got to see these selected works as they should be, large and bold, or small and intimate, where you have to kind of come up really close to the image and see the detail. All the surface textures, printmaking is so much about that texture, the raised image of an intaglio, or the embossing of a relief print. You just lose that in the reproduction. I also like trying to figure out how the artist has produced the work. So that's what's really fun about a printmaking show. For selecting the work for the awards, what I think you're going to see in my choices, and I think really from any juror, is how awards reflect the particular taste and aesthetic of that juror. So I'd like to first say to the artists in the exhibition who did not receive awards, this is not in any way a reflection on the quality of your work or your vision as an artist, but more as a reflection of mine. So I think the show is just really strong, and it was very difficult to narrow down my choices. But when I do look at a work of art, just so you can see where I'm coming from a little bit, and steps that I take in my analysis, and I had to be a little bit more than just a spectator here. I think, like we all are, we're impacted visually by scale and color, shape and texture, just those aesthetic responses that we have to a work. But I think next, what I call it, the left brain sort of kicks in and starts asking questions. What is it? What's going on? Is it familiar? Is it strange? Does it inspire? Is it awe-inspiring? Does it put me on edge? And then we begin to name our interpretations emotionally or psychologically, or just cognitively. How is this reflecting the time that we live in some cases? And so, all artists are working across, from very, very different motivations. And so that's what I love about art, but that's kind of my approach to experiencing the work. But as printmakers, we go to another level, I think, and we ask, what is the medium? Usually we can generally tell. Sometimes I'm not sure if sometimes it can look like a screen print, or it could be a monotype. So there's that. And what is the technique in the medium being represented? So I kind of see, for a lino cut, for example, like a reduction, how many colors are being used? How is that registration? So in a reduction lino cut, if you can still see some thin white lines, that is a very successful print, because that is the first color that has to be saved in the image with all the successive colors going next. So that impresses me, because that's always hard to get. The other thing is there picking or plucking of the ink? And if you have 4 or 5 colors, it's really hard to lay down another layer of ink on top of 5 other layers. So there's real technical challenges that I can admire when looking at a print. Not to nerd out too much, but and with an etching, again, will really reveal how well it was hand wiped, how in an aqua tint, what you're looking for is, how distinct the grays are. Are they nice and flat? And that's what you're looking for, real even inking, not under inked, not over inked, so that you know that there's a consistency in the addition. And that is also a real challenge, is to wipe an aqua tint and get it, just the way you want it. A beautiful lithograph shouldn't be coarse, should reveal like gentle reticulation and, those subtle grays. The challenge with lithography is those drop out if you don't have a real secure image. And I think out of all the media, litho is probably sometimes best left in the hands of the expert master printers. When I look at mixed media, printmaking that includes digital imaging, what I look for, that's a little bit more challenging. I tend to look for how much I can see is created by the individual, and how much of the resulting image is computer generated, or of some sort of secondary source. And sometimes that can be the whole point of the digital image, is to take the hand out of the process. So there's a lot to think about when you're looking at these mixed media work, in terms of the process and how the artist is putting it all together. So generally, after I delve into that, I kind of run to a plain old lino cut with one color and rest my brain and my eyes for a little bit. But since all of those media were covered in this show, I wanted to kind of address that and applaud you all, because there were some really excellent prints and just amazing printing going on. So I was just really impressed. I love it all. So Michael, I'd like to go ahead and announce the awards, and we'll go through them. And I'd like to just maybe talk a little bit about each one as we go along. Okay, so this is my choice for Best of Show. Margaret Van Patten. All We Carry is a color etching. And to speak to this, it's a good size print. I would say, as I recall, maybe 11 by 14, the image, or maybe even slightly larger. So that's already a challenge in intaglio printmaking. I found it to be interesting on a technical level, if I can maybe even start there. Getting color into an etching is always a big challenge. I'm not exactly sure how they got the red box in there, but I see some soft ground etching. That's the blue lace background. So it's a combination of techniques. The blue and the red, the color is very well printed. And it really sparked some thinking. Obviously, we can look to a title in a work, and it will guide us a little bit. All That We Carry, and we can see that we're all kind of pretty heavy these days with what we're carrying. There's a lot of burden, there's a lot of stress, and the idea of unpacking that. My interpretation of that, we're all on this journey and we're trying to unpack all that we carry. And sometimes when we look over at our dog, we just wish life was that simple. And I know that I do that a lot. So I spent a lot of time with this print. It's very well printed. It made me think. I could really relate to it. And yeah, so that just kind of did rise to the top in my choices. Okay, so the second place goes to Monique Wales, Birds of a Feather, which is a reduction linocut. I think it just said linocut. I'm not sure. I'm guessing it's reduction as opposed to multi-plate. And what I really, really loved about this print, first of all, is again, technically, it's quite amazing. There are so many colors there. And as I mentioned earlier, you can see those white lines that are in the feathers are really, that's just really hard to get. That's perfect registration. So I really admire it technically. I don't know what kind of birds these are. The title doesn't refer to that, but that's okay. When I'm looking at this, what I really appreciate is a mood that it creates, because it's choosing to show either a dusk or a dawn. So that often creates in that ambient light, we always respond to that time of day particularly. So I look at that maybe, and it sets a mood or a tone for the piece. And the two birds together, maybe they're a mating pair. I just responded to it that way. It's a nice print. It's beautifully rendered. Feathers are hard. Feathers and fur would be hard. So I appreciated it on those subtle levels. Okay. Third place award goes to Peter Baczek. Hope I pronounced that right. Diagonals, which is an etching. And as I looked at this, I could see just a really excellent job, again, hand wiping the aqua tint. You can see here what I mentioned earlier, those really solid flat values of gray. So when you're etching a certain shape in aqua tint for however many seconds or minutes, you would expect that to bite continuously and hold the ink that way. So it's excellent on that level. I think compositionally, it's sort of more of an abstract kind of composition, referring to the diagonals, looking down on the street, the sidewalk. The strong shadow shape is interesting. The contrast with the grate is the crack in the sidewalk. I was reminded of another etcher, another artist who worked in intaglio printmaking, is Edward Hopper. And he liked to look down on the street. And although this doesn't have a figure in it, it has that same kind of sense of that strong light and taking that particular viewpoint, which I appreciated. Okay. And then the juror's choice is Tina Juvonen. I hope I said that right. The Gathering, which is a multi-block relief print as opposed to a reduction. Now, you can't tell from this image, but it is a very big print. And again, if I speak about the technical aspects at first, so that in itself is a challenge. I think it's maybe at least 28 inches wide, maybe more. And what we see in the background, you see that really smooth gradation of color, and it's just perfectly done. So it's very even. You don't see any brayer marks on it. It's smooth, it's beautiful. Then we see the murmuration of birds. And if you come to the show, really do look at this closely, because you can see, gosh, how challenging it was to carve around every single one of those little birds, because of relief printmaking, it's what you carve away that is the white, and what you leave behind takes the ink. So you're always working in reverse, and that can be a challenge. So we see some beautiful gradations within the shape of the bird murmuration, And then being a multiple block print, I'm guessing, so we have the background block, we have the murmuration, and possibly the land could be one. And then she's incorporating the wood at the bottom, as you know, as the water would be. But this really speaks to the medium too. So when you're working in wood block, you will often use the grain of wood and incorporate it in the print. And I think it's just done in a really beautiful way in this print. Really comes together well. And it's juror's choice. I'm very sympathetic to this particular subject matter. I work in it myself, and so it just seemed the most likely choice for me. And now the merit awards. First, we have Becky Barini, and this is SLP number 8, which is a multi-block relief print. And as I mentioned before, I always look to a title because I think it's an opportunity for the artist to direct the viewer if they want to. And I take advantage of it sometimes. Sometimes my titles are very neutral. And I think in some cases, especially with abstract artists, they don't want to frame it at all for you. They want you to come to it with your own ideas and your own history and your own intentions for looking at that. So I appreciate that. And this really interested me as a print because once again, I can see that this is, there are multiple plates going on. Each one is individually carved. It all comes together. I think it's held together by those reds and tints of red that move through it, complemented with the greens. And the other interesting aspect from a printmaker's point of view is how to use transparent color. And by layering the color, you then create different tones and other colors and different shapes within. So that might seem very simple, but I think the effect can be very complex. And I think it's very satisfying to look at in this particular print. Okay. And this is Paula Gill, Harriet Powers quilt maker. And this is a hand-colored lino cut. So this being very different from the previous one, very strong imagery and also a title that is meant to inform the viewer while they're looking at it. This is an actual person. This is about a person. And so when I'm looking at it, this is Harriet Powers, and she was a quilt maker. And by looking at her dress and maybe some of the symbols around, it looks like, this is a person from the past. And these are symbols that represent maybe the particular location and area or culture where they may have come from. And they're just interesting compositionally to kind of bounce and look through. We see the cat and the house and the birds and the hand and the eye. And some of them seem kind of more universal symbols, but they're very curious too. And the other aspect I liked about this is just the composition itself, how it's broken up with that border around the image. And then you kind of get this reverse of the black sort of surrounding the images on the right. I think it's really nicely balanced. Now, being hand colored, this is a different kind of challenge. And I believe when I looked at this, it could have been, she might've been using watercolor as a hand coloring. And the fact that she achieved those really flat areas of color, I think is very important when you're hand coloring a print so that you don't turn it into a painting. It still retains its printmaking, print essence first and foremost, and it's not just a background for a painting. it gets tricky, I think. And the other thing printmakers need to think about is that if you're editioning something, you have to have the expectations that they all look the same. So if you have number, 5 out of 25, then number 17 should look like your print. And I think that in this case, that could definitely be, that can be achieved. And it's just a sweet print. I love it. Okay. And then finally, we have Elsie Remnitz. Now, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. And this is a monotype. There were a few monotypes, quite a few monotypes in the exhibition. This one in particular caught my attention. It kind of is, I looked, of course, to the title first, Summer Bouquet. So I'm thinking of flowers. I'm looking for that. I'm looking for a certain time of year, maybe flowers that are in bloom in the summer. I'm thinking about that. Although it's quite abstract, what's interesting, and it's a little hard to see in the image here, are the different kinds of monotype that are being used here. There's a lot of stencil being used. I think this has probably been run through the press or hand printed with many, many layers. And it's a large print, so you're losing the scale a little bit on this. I think, gosh, it might have been more than 18 by 24 inches, just the image alone. So it's quite monumental. It had a great impact, and I just had a great time looking at it and discovering and thinking about how it was produced. So that is the third merit award, and those were my choices. And I think we have one more, right, Michael?
That's right. As I said, the People's Choice Award will be announced at the end of the exhibit, but this year we added an award from Northwind Art called the Curator's Choice, and I got to choose that award along with some help from my team. And that goes to Rebecca Boraz for Remembering the Future #2. This is an intaglio. And I just thought, again, with a lot of what Marit is saying about values in the grays and blacks, this had a lot of that success in it. But I love the image and the the composition as well. And I say I had help from my team. I've been working with our exhibit designer, Jay Haskins, who's also a printmaker, and I want to recognize him because he placed this in a spot, and I know his design so well that I know he had a special affinity towards this print as well. So just by his placement of this in the designed exhibit. So and I will say he is also a printmaker and as a member of Corvidae, which just happens our small community. A lot of artists are filtering around the same circles. Well, now we can open it up for question and answer. If anyone has a question, just I ask you to unmute yourself and speak up. We have a smallish group. There's 27 of us, so I think I can manage that from the hosting. I will start. Just here we go. Let's let Margaret start. Margaret Woodcock, if you unmute yourself, we can get your question answered.
Actually, I don't have a question so much as a comment that I feel like the whole presentation of putting this together from a Corvidae point of view and inviting Marit to be our juror, I feel, and because it was all online, and when I came in and saw the show hung, I was extremely impressed also. And I want to thank you, Marit, for your efforts and choosing what you did. I think it's a beautiful show. And I keep encouraging people to go because I think it truly represents what printmaking can be and all the various techniques that are available to artists and images, how you deal with images. I just think it's wonderful. And I want to say thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It was a pleasure. It was hard, but it was it was really fun. And I'm sorry we didn't get to have a party and an opening.
That's great. But thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I've seen a good many of these Printmaker's Hand exhibit over the years, and I was impressed incredibly by the reduction lino cut and woodcut pieces that are shown here. So I do encourage everyone to check them out. They are some of the highest quality I've seen in that medium, and it's interesting that you work in that as well. So and I'll let Peter Basek ask a question here. He's raising his hand. Go ahead, Peter.
Hi, it's not as much question as sort of echo what Margaret just said, and even Merritt about printmaking shows in general. I love going to them because of what you see in terms of technique. There's the various media, but she touched on the point of just mentioning about trying to figure out how artists have accomplished a particular vision. And that's the beauty, I think, of printmaking versus the other disciplines. As a printmaker, I'm obviously biased, but I think printmaking shows in general are just so much more interesting to go to and to look at the images, not just for technical expertise, but how they accomplish what they're doing through sometimes extremely difficult and resistant bases, whether it's wood or metal, even lino cut. I just finished a lino cut, which is not my medium of choice, but there are so many challenges each time that come forward in print shows and printmaking in general. So it's a pleasure to be part of print shows, and I just wanted to express that feeling about this show. I mean, I'm in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, so I probably won't get to see the show, but that was an excellent video depiction of the show, and I will look at it again. So thank you.
So there's some nice prints behind you, Peter.
Oh, yeah. There's this one is actually a painting, but
oh,
yeah, the one on I'm confused with the mirror imaging here. That one is a lithograph. Okay, that one's a lithograph, and then that one over here is a monotype. But yeah, it's in my studio, and I seem to have most of my work on the wall. But,
we're doing the same thing.
yes. Where else are you going to hang it? I was very pleased to see the award for diagonals. You had mentioned. Hope going on too much here. You had mentioned about your impression and vision of the impression of the piece, and I'm always interested in hearing other people talk about my work to get a different perspective. As a realist, I see things as compositions, and I can maybe interpret them and change them a little bit. And sometimes there are stories behind them, but diagonals in particular was, as you mentioned, I was just struck by the composition at my feet, and it just yelled at me that, you know, do this, which I did. It's difficult sometimes looking at things and interpreting them in a certain way. And you know, I'm somewhat at a disadvantage sometimes because my images are realistic depictions of something, and I try to get something more into them than just, well, that's a pretty picture of a building or a street or something. I try to get something behind the work that might be a little mysterious and or bring forth some thoughts, like Merritt had some thoughts about the piece. So again, it's just thank you for seeing that.
Thank you, Peter. Does anyone else have a question for Marit or a comment about the exhibit? Well, I'd just like to say, again, just seeing the variety of printmaking techniques and we have some materials. The biggest questions we're getting are, how is this done? How are these pieces made? So we have some materials at the exhibit for our staff to talk through that, and it will help enlighten. This talk certainly has enlightened me on some of the techniques, and thank you, Marit, for elaborating on those. As this is recorded, we can come back to it and have the complete picture of the walkthrough and this talk. I will also say that we're trying to plan some other events around this exhibit, so please stay tuned to our website for more information. We are going to be posting the award winners on the website tomorrow, so they'll be up, and there'll be placards on the walls as well. And if there aren't any further questions, Marit, do you have any last words?
Well, again, thank you for showing up tonight and listening to my ramble. I'm really excited to see who the People's Choice is going to be. I brought a lot of people up with me to juror the show, and they all voted. So they'll be wanting to know who that is too. And I just had a really great experience. And you have a beautiful space, and it's a great excuse to come up to Port Townsend. So I will keep coming up.
Well, thank you all. And once again, have a great evening. And if you want to see this recording, it'll be on our website soon. Thank you.